everybody. My name is Ariana, and I am a product marketing manager at SyncSort. And SyncSort, we love helping our customers get the most value from all their data. So whether that is connecting something, different data sources, data integration, data quality, or data security. I hope I did an okay elevator pitch. My CMO is in the audience today, so I hope that was a good pitch. He's smiling, so I'm guessing I did okay. But before I get into what we're going to talk about today, I figured we'll just kind of move a little bit because we've been sitting for a minute. By a show of hands, how many people here today have someone with a sales enablement title or sales enablement department in their company? Awesome. And so how many of you today don't have a sales enablement person yet, and you're the only product marketing manager at your company? And then people who are not the only ones, but just don't have sales enablement. All right, awesome. So I'm hoping that this presentation is really going to cover what to do when you don't have sales enablement. For those of you that do have sales enablement in your organization, I still use a lot of these practices that I talk about in my role today, which I am very fortunate to have a sales enablement person and a whole team to help me out. But our first question is really going to be, does product marketing own sales enablement? We'll get into that a little bit. It's a touchy subject for some. And then looking at a phased approach to building up a sales enablement program, we'll get into some best practices, and then I'll show you how I pulled all this together so you know that I'm just not up here and just a random woman who loves to talk at product marketing events. So why is sales enablement important? So the first thing to know is Seismic, who's another sales enablement software provider. They do a lot of research on buyers and how to sell to buyers and different things like that. There was a study that they published, and I think it was about 60% of buyers, before they talk to a salesperson, they've already made a decision. They already know what they want. They've looked through your product sheets. They understand the product intimately. So what that means is that for a seller, the customer sale becomes a bit more customer-centric. So we've talked a lot about, during this conference, talking about the business problem, what problems we're trying to solve. And this is one of those things where, we have now sellers that now have to have a conversation one level above. Do you need this? Oh, here's what you need. It's less of a seller being a consultant and telling them what they need. The buyer already knows what they need. They need to know how your products are going to solve that problem. And that can be a difficult thing for a salesperson to do if they're not properly enabled and things go awry. So the reality is that sales enablement is a hot potato. I particularly love this adorable little evil potato. I will say Googling for hot potato has yielded some very interesting results, some of which I've had to erase from my history. They're a little interesting. They're very extreme hot potatoes out there. But what happens when you have no one doing sales enablement is that it gets passed around, right? And the problem is that when no one's holding the hot potato, no one gets the results of what hot potatoes make. So hot potatoes make amazing French fries. And the French fries are things that everyone across the organization benefits, not just sales. So that is a stronger marketing message. That is a scalable sales process. So for those of you that are in startups, as you're adding people to your sales team, how do you make that process repeatable? Competitive intelligence, consistent marketing messages, and then kind of staying away from that behavior that sometimes happens where salespeople don't have anything from you, so they start making their own things. And then they start making their own products for some reason, because apparently that's the next stage with no sales enablement. So where does product marketing fall into all of this? So my feeling is that as a product marketing manager, I am the steward of three things. I am the steward of the insight and strategy for my organization, understanding the market drivers, the personas, use case development, the target market. I am the keeper of the messaging and that go-to-market strategy. So a lot of people, of course, we collaborate to do all of these things well, but these are things that, we really own. The thing is that we also own enablement sometimes too, and that's why it's at the end. So this could be training and development. In my product marketing life, I have trained salespeople. It wasn't the product managers that were doing that. I've had to support sales content, build presentations. So it's all of these different things that we're doing, and not just those 3 core tenets of our jobs. So when we look at a phased approach and building up a phased approach of sales enablement when you're starting from nothing, I kind of came up with these 5 phases. And these are things that I'll do no matter where I am. And when I start in an organization, I try and look at where I can fit these phases into my daily work to help sales. So when we look at these phases, no matter what you're doing or how you choose to do these, whether you're doing them in parallel or one after another, just make sure that you're always having alignment with your sales and marketing leadership. Don't take this on unless you have alignment with those folks, because then you're ending up doing a job that maybe is distracting from other core things that you need to be doing or a different focus for the organization. You also don't want to build sales enablement materials that the CRO disagrees with, because then they'll never use them. So the first phase is really about interviewing. So in this case, just like we do customer interviews all the time, in this case for sales enablement, sales is our customer. So it's important to talk to them. But I say sales in a general sense. You have to look at sales and not just the account executives, but people who go beyond that. So anyone who touches the sales cycle. So that could be a sales engineer, business development, even someone in demand generation that is maybe getting requests from a salesperson on certain content that they need to be able to do their job better. Keep a record of those core themes as you're doing these interviews. I try to record them, but most of the time I'll do shorthand notes. And what I'll do is I'll put all of my information in an Excel sheet, and then I'll start to group in the interviews in the Excel sheet by theme. So then I know that if 15 times someone's saying we don't have good competitive intelligence, I know I probably should work on competitive intelligence first. Consider teams outside of your immediate geography. So you may have teams that span the sales needs in EMEA and in the United States are going to be totally different. For a lot of countries, places like Germany, they are very centric in their region. It has to be very German specific. Use cases have to be according to that country. So it's important to understand those needs when you're starting to build up a program. And my advice is leaving the building is the best thing to do. I have had the best conversations over a cup of coffee or a drink, of course always on me, but also on the company because I'm expensing it afterwards, super sneaky. But it's just good to get out of the office because then people start to break down their walls a little bit and they don't feel like they're being listened to that much. And as far as interview questions, one of the things with the interview questions is that you should make sure that they're open-ended. Don't ask something that somebody can say yes or no to. Really give them some time to answer. I also have found that the pauses, there's been times where, I'm interviewing someone or a salesperson talking to them, and I'm just pausing because I'm writing something down, but that pause kind of signals to them, I'm still waiting for them to say something. So then, the real juice comes out, and I get the real information on what they need, and I start to understand more. And so what I try to do is when looking at best practices for questions, my first thing that I start every conversation with is, how can I help you? How can I help your sales cycle? How can I improve your sales cycle? Tell me about your process. What was the biggest loss that you had and why? And sometimes it doesn't have to do with sales enablement. Sometimes it really is just a competitive situation. Things happen. But it's just good to understand the why of someone, losing a deal competitively. And then also, I tell them, if you had a magic wand, or when I'm new and I'm doing this, I'll say, oh, I'm so new and ignorant and I don't know anything about this organization. If I could do anything for you, what do you wish? What were the resources that you wish that I could give you? And then usually I'll get a list, and I try and, within reason, to answer on some of those. But it's a good way of just kind of getting them to open up and kind of nail down exactly what they need. So phase 2 is key use cases and competitive markets. So the reason that I bundled these two together is twofold. One, I have 30 minutes to be up here. I want to have time for questions, so I don't want to space them out into two phases. But also sometimes, depending on the use case, your competitive market changes. So at an organization that I was at, we had a same product. We sold into insurance, we sold into financial services. If I was in insurance, my competitor was an insurance-centric claims software. If I sold into financial services, my competitor was a fintech startup. Those are two totally different use cases, vertical markets, and now my competitive market has changed. So I had to enable for those vertical markets as well as the use case. So just keep that in mind, that sometimes these things are tied together. If you're not sure about, building resources for these things, I spend a lot of time in CRM. I use my sales interviews as ways to dig into this a little bit. And then, of course, there's market research out there like Forrester, Gartner. I tend to bother the analysts quite a bit. I'm a former analyst, so I tend to get on their annoying side by asking weird questions, but they're okay. And then, also kind of from that, looking at what content is needed to support these use cases and this competitive analysis. Is it simply a SWOT? Is it something more detailed? Do you need a quick guide? What are those things that you need? It's cut off at the bottom, but just keep in mind that first of all, you shouldn't be doing this alone. You should be doing this in practice with product managers. A lot of times I have found sales engineers to be very helpful on some of this stuff too, because they're getting to the demo stage or maybe a bake-off with a competitor. But at the bottom, I have just make sure that you're keeping these as living documents. So don't do a SWOT and be like, oh man, I'm done with this SWOT. They're terrible to do. But like, I'm done with this SWOT and this battle card, and I don't have to think about this competitor ever again. No, you still have to think about them. Keep a cadence in which you're going to update this information. As far as competitors that are privately owned, this was a big challenge where I was, when I was working at a startup, was all my co-competitors were also private. So what I did was I started to look at their PE firms, their VC firms, because a lot of them have to issue annual reports. In their annual reports, they talk about their investments, and then I could kind of dig in a little bit into the strategy of my competitors that were private. I also went on a lot of developer, user sites and websites, looked at LinkedIn user groups, and kind of tried to listen for complaints, looked at release notes with my product manager, and then also just measured some just kind of more qualitative things like, sentiment on Glassdoor, looked at their hiring pages. If you see that they're hiring for a lot of developers, for example, with a certain type of skill, it might be a hint that they're trying to build something a certain way. If somebody's hiring for a ton of cloud-centric developers and they're on-premise competitor, you kind of know the direction that they're going to be going. And then as you're building all of this stuff out, it's important to keep a content inventory to understand what you have in existence and what you need to build. So the first thing is the major mistake I see a lot of organizations make is that they don't have content that spans the entire buyer's journey. And what I mean by this is we have a product sheet that's great for demand gen to fill out a form and get that information down off the website. We capture somebody as a lead. But as that person becomes closer to being a customer, we don't have a technical brochure or something that gives a bit more of a deep dive into that content and what that product actually does. So those are things that you would work with your product manager or someone technical in the organization to build. It's not something you should own all of this content, but it's one of those things about just understanding where in the buyer's journey you need to fill in the gaps and determine those gaps. You should plan out content. So if you, in the case of building out something like, I used to do this guide, it was for every product release, it was me, development, and our PMs. And it was what was new in the release. And it was like a 20-page white paper document thing that went into the features and the market benefits and all of this stuff. Before we even started writing this, we treated it like a campaign. So we wrote a campaign brief around it. What was the goals? Who was going to do what? how we were going to handle it, what was the layout, what was the content structure. So that way when we, started to actually execute on it, we had a clear idea of how to handle such a large document. And then also looking at keywords. So if you are going to put these things into, a repository, just think about the keywords that you want to associate with those files. Just keep that in mind. Or if there are keywords that are in there already, like, are those the right keywords for your salespeople to find the content that they need? You also have to measure the success of the content. So I'm going to be honest, the quota attainment and the sales time decrease is a project in itself to understand, to measure. What I do today is, because as a product marketing manager, I'm not necessarily responsible today for sales enablement, but I just want to understand what sales decks people are actually using that I'm making, or am I wasting my time making this brochure for you? Things like that. We have our sales enablement content in SharePoint, and in SharePoint I can export a report and see the download usage. So once a month I'll export this report and then look at what was the downloads for different things. So that way I can start to understand, this asset is not very popular, and then I can talk to my sales leadership and say, look, I noticed no one is using this. Can you tell me why? For the resource center, so as we're moving down these phases, the end goal, phase 5, is that we're creating something, an enablement center or some sort of repository. It's important to keep a DAM mindset. I'm a former photographer and I've done a lot of digital asset management, so our favorite joke is the damn. So there's your corny dad joke for the day. But remember that no matter what you build, the content needs to be found. So you can't just build this stuff and just dump it in one place. You need to have a folder structure. You need to have a naming convention. This is particularly important when you have things that you're going to give to sales that are internal facing versus external. You do not want them to send something that's like a buyer persona, and you have your pains and your gains, and then they send that off to a customer. That is my worst nightmare ever, is that somebody sends an internal labeled document to a customer. So please make sure that you have a file naming convention that reflects what that intent of the content is. Also have version control rules. So, if there's version 2 out and people are still using version 1, they are no longer allowed to use version 1. I will come find you. People know that. I've only been with SingStore for 7 months, but I do have one sales guy that comes to me and he's like, can I use this? And I'm like, yes, you can, because that is the current version. Good job. You have to be a stickler about that, especially if you're dealing with products or a rebrand or things that are moving super fast. You want to make sure that you're giving your sales team the most up-to-date information possible. I also keep file sizes low, only because I know that we love PowerPoint, and with PowerPoint comes giant file sizes. On an iPad or something, if somebody's doing a pitch and they're just scrolling through it on their iPad, they don't want to spend 20 minutes waiting for something to upload. So the other thing is you now need, you've built all of this stuff, the great stuff that you're building, you've gone through all the phases, good for you. You also didn't sleep for 3 months while you were building a sales enablement resource center, welcome. So all the great work you're doing needs to live someplace. It doesn't have to be fancy, so please, Crayon, don't kill me. But if you can't afford something like a Crayon or a Seismic or Sabo, that's okay. There are free things you can do. You can create a Dropbox that people can access. In my previous organization, and we'll go through this in the case study, we had Jira. We just so happened to also have Confluent, because Jira and Confluent ship together, so I used Confluence. Everybody had Confluence, so why not use what we had? Also make sure that you're thinking through the structure of this before you get into it. So with this resource repository, you want to make sure that you're aligning with sales leadership on the actual structure of it, because that will determine how people find the content. So this is just a rough outline of how I've organized things in the past. I apologize if it's a little bit of an eye chart, but usually what we'll do is we'll start with, what's the customer type? Are you B2B, B2C? I've worked in organizations that have sold both types of software. And then the vertical market, or maybe the use case, depends on how you want to organize that. one company that I worked for, we launched a sales enablement resource center. We did it by the product first. That lasted all of 5 months. We had to switch it to the use case and vertical market, and then went into like competitive information, use cases, general product content. So, all of these places can be interconnected with each other, but it's just keeping in mind that first structure when somebody goes to the page, what are they going to see first? And then the fifth thing is really to enable on that resource repository. So all of this hard work that you're doing and all of these sleepless nights are worth nothing if no one uses it. So you need to make sure that you're getting your salespeople on board and using this repository that you're creating. Ideally, you want to align it with something that's already going on in their lives, so like a boot camp or sales kickoff. And to really get them into it, my best practice here is just play into what they do best, which is make it a competition. I had a coworker that launched one of these, and what she did was she created like a karate themed sales enablement resource center. So the more resources you use, the higher your belt was. So whoever got to black belt first got an Apple Watch. And like these people, she said the usage was like ridiculous. And still today they boast about like, I'm a Savo black belt and you're only a white. Like, it's really funny just to watch like the dynamic go on. And it kind of encourages them initially to start to go in to use this resource center. So as far as the case study, this is starting from scratch. So first of all, I never thought I'd be standing up here talking about sales enablement as my case study, but it just so happened to be the case when I was working in a startup. In January 2019, I was working at a financial services startup, and we hired 7 new salespeople. And when I say new, it was like new from the world, like the utero, like they were just babies straight out of college. Kind of not really financial services experts, great dressers though. And then we had about 8 existing sales representatives. All of them attend this January kickoff. I helped with the boot camp, did the marketing messages, did my presentations, right? And at the end of it, they have to deliver what's called a value pitch. So the VC wants this value pitch. And if the salespeople don't score a certain number, they get let go. Well, the thing is that everybody scored lower than desired, with the new people, not the existing. Everyone scored lower than desired. So what happened was they turned to me and they're like, hey, you do marketing, which is usually like what somebody was saying, yeah, like you do marketing, you can build the sales enablement resource center. So what happened is I ended up getting tasked with this. So just as a deeper look at some of the numbers, I'm a big marketplace of listener, so by the numbers, we had 60% of the sales force had less than 5 years of experience, like professionally, sales experience, everything. They were very, very new. 3 had financial services background, so these were people that were already existing in the organization or they had majored in finance. And then I had 2 geographies that I was dealing with, so the UK and the United States. So again, sorry for an eye chart, but just to kind of take you through what I did. The first thing that I did was I interviewed about 15 people. We went out for coffee, we went out for drinks. I talked to people that were, sales engineers, sales people, the SEs, the new guys, everyone. And just kind of gathered and, got information. What I found was that a lot of the resources that we had, while we did have them, they were very scattered, which is why I started to think about building a resource repository for them, because it was one of those things that we just didn't have a good place where we had everything at one place. They also were going into a lot of sales engagements blind because they didn't have a lot of competitive information. So a lot of our competitors were private, information was old that they had, so I knew that there was going to be a competitive swing to the Sales Enablement Resource Center. When I looked at the use cases, what I did find was that most of the sold use cases also had the least amount of content. So this financial services company dealt with FINRA and SEC regulations. We didn't have a lot of information in the background on what FINRA means for that buyer, what SEC means for that buyer, and sending someone out to talk to a compliance officer that's brand new out of school, and they're like, well, how does this affect FINRA for me? And IR whatever -17. I mean, that is just such an unfair thing to put a person in the field to do. None of us would be successful if we didn't have that information. information. So we decided that from working with my leadership team that we would target 3 competitors because we knew that these were the top 3. Also competitive things like SWATs and battle cards take a long time to make. So me and the product manager decided that we would cover 3 competitors, and then we would also build some product specific content for the regulations as well. We had a content inventory, which we just kind of did 2 days, just working across all of these different departments and gathering the information. Realized that, again, we were missing all of these things. And then I built the resource center in Confluence. So the structure was decided and designed in lockstep with the VP of marketing, but also the CRO. So at the time, I had a little bit of an advantage to this. So when I show you the success numbers, don't get excited. I'm not that amazing. I just happened to have the CRO as my boss at the time. So it's a little bit of a different story when the sales guy is telling his subordinates, hey, you better work on this and do this. Because the boot camp had passed, but we knew we wanted to retest these guys in a couple months, what we did was we created an event. So I created a spy game, and these kids, I guess these guys, they loved it. They were obsessed with it. So every single spy mission had something that they had to do that had to do with Confluence, the Sales Enablement Resource Center, and getting them more towards a value pitch. So again, weekly progress meetings across, so always aligning with our sales and marketing leadership. So looking at the game a little bit closer. So every week, it was so much fun. It was fun for me. I'm a child of teachers. So like, I just love this stuff. It like brings out like my genetics. It's in my blood. So it was 3 weeks plus a final mission. The first mission, so they got every week, I would go to their cubes, I'd print out their mission and leave it. We had the experienced sales guys in on it. So they were fake prospects for me. So the first mission was that they had to cold call the prospect and tease out what competitor was that prospect had. So the sales guy, that kind of helped them, develop questions to figure out what that competitor was. Then the second mission was that they had to use Confluence to look up the competitor and recall the prospect. So that meant that they were looking up battle cards, they were looking up quick guides, they were looking up all of this information on Confluence. Then the third mission was to build a value pitch using the persona that they were assigned, that prospect they were assigned, and also using Confluence. So in Confluence, we had built out a persona section, so using that as a guide to build out to their prospect. And then their final mission was to do the value pitch in the group, so redo it in the group, which was great because they didn't realize that they were getting retested again. They were younger. I think there was a lot of anxiety around that first pitch because they knew how important it was. The second one was fun. The other thing was that whoever won got a gift card, and that was like the real goal here, was like in addition to really getting into the spy stuff, they were also very into the gift card. So as far as the results, so again, like I said, don't get excited. This is a small sample size. All of the new employees adopted the Resource Center, and we actually had a lot of the established salespeople adopt the Resource Center as well. And actually, it was funny because I had just started SingStore, and I got a call like 2 weeks into my job, and it was from one of the sales guys that I had previously worked with. And he's like, first of all, you did so much. This Resource Center is awesome. I love it so much. Where can I find the battle card on this? I'm like, I just had to crack up. I'm like, okay, well, as long as you're all using it. And probably the best part of this is that there was a roughly 20% increase in the average score. So while some of them didn't score, out of the park, still, from what I know, they're all still working there. So I think that that's a great thing. And that's all I have. And I hopefully have some time for questions.
Thank you, Ariana. Any questions for her? Thanks. Hi. So this is all really great, by the way. So my question is about kind of one sort of not really mistake that we make a lot of times is they're sitting down with sales teams and saying to them, what do you need? Because I think the answer is always the same.
Yeah.
It's everything. So how do you kind of approach that in talking to those teams and really identifying like what is it that you actually need versus like I have these 10 requests for specific content?
Sure. So sometimes I'll use the data against them from the other interviews. So like if they say, oh, I want everything, and I'm saying, really? Oh, you want everything? Your peers are telling me they just need a battle card. Like, this is interesting. Like, how are you doing? Just kind of like sneakily doing that. And then also just, telling them like, well, if you had to prioritize one thing, if I had to give you one thing, if I could deliver one thing for you this quarter, what would that be? I'm dealing with that right now where I am, like, I have a team that's very enthusiastic, so I kind of have to step back and say, like, guys, what do you need for this quarter? And then we'll plan the rest of it. So it's something I also like, I tend to say, okay, so, that's also something I also try to work on too. But usually if you make them say, like, rank it or you have some data, it helps to kind of nip it a little bit.
Any other questions? Cool. Thank you, Ariana.